Ladies and gentlemen, it is I, Alestrum Villanaros of Oddwood, and I have come to retell a grand story of members of the wonderful institution that is the Lodge. Our lovely tale begins in the grand hall of our wonderful building, with a small dwarven man. Well, I guess he's not small for a dwarf, but with a dwarven man being called out to by our wonderful maiden of contracts brow. She had a job that had been sitting around the board for far too long and was not willing to have it sit there, nailed and collecting dust for any longer. So she collected this gentleman and told her to go fetch the assistant of Blackjack to join him on this wonderful adventure. The dwarf, Gildry by name, journeyed through the halls and ended up at the door of Blackjack's workshop. There, after a polite knock, he met this goblin assistant that he was meant to find. This goblin, Oto, or Oat for short, as he is so lovely and fondly known as. Oto was not necessarily overjoyed at the idea of going out on another contract, as he was definitely more of a stay by Blackjack's side and tinker on some fancy devices, which do all sorts of glorious things, which I maybe will understand eventually. But he, after a brief discussion with Blackjack about his current affair, headed out after being given this strange ball of sorts. It seemed to convulse in on itself, it was glowing red, it was a very strange device. After their wonderful introduction, they ventured to the teleportation room, and after discovering that it was towards Half Mount, where they would have to go, they rang the summoning bell to summon our lovely undead lady, Jagannath, who sent them through a portal to Half Mount. After spending almost no time in there at all, they quickly left the town and headed towards the area that their quarries would most likely be found in. After they set out and marched for about 4 hours, nightfall hit, and instead of being caught wandering through the forest at night, they decided to set up camp. While they were setting up camp, Oto managed to catch wind of some purveyors that were not necessarily invited to watch them prepare to sleep, as very few people are invited to watch sleep. A quick ruse was geniusly concocted by the Tinker Genius himself, as he was subtly heading towards the outside of the clearing. They immediately sprung into action against their watchers, and as they acted, they discovered all of them. There were a total of 5. One was setting up a strange machine, and the other ones were taking various positions around. The dwarf immediately rushes to one of them and just begins releasing a flurry of blows. Meanwhile, the goblin tinkerer is firing a salvo of just shots from this strange arcane object and rays of shivering frost, and is just manipulating the battlefield from then. After the beginning of the scuffle, another goblin appears, this one dressed and acting a little differently as the others, as he goes and strikes at one of the ones that was attacking the others. However, as one of them during the combat, who was hidden in the tree, fell, he went to help the one down, saying that it was no right spot for him to die laying down, showing a great sense of honor is found in this goblin warrior. During the scuffle, the goblin looses a stray bolt from his strange arcane firearm, and it whizzes into the woods. And a strange roar replaces the sound that they send him. Nothing comes from that for another 40 seconds as the fight continues, and then is eventually ended as all of their goblin attackers are torn to asunder, except for the one who fell from the tree, who was merely knocked unconscious by their goblin aid. After a few mild introductions, this mysterious stranger who came to their aid was Turgle. At the end of the introductions, however, this creature that made that strange roar appears, who chases one of the goblins that had attacked them, that had managed to escape. As the goblin runs back into the clearing that they planned on setting their camp into, He passes through the clearing and just keeps going, but what follows him is this strange albino four-armed gorilla, which lunges on top of Otto and releases a flurry of blows on him. Otto, using his gun to create a strange kind of purple umbrella out of this crystallized gas, this creature hits it with three of its arms, creating a network of cracks along the surface before managing to shatter it with his fourth fist and then going in to tear with his teeth. The dwarf's response was to retaliate and do almost the same thing, landing 3 attacks with axes all over the creature's body. As it was in a rough state from the previous projectile and the now surprise slashes all over its body, Turgle steps forth and utters an incantation as this dust blows out through his mouth, skitters off of his hand, and goes around this creature's head. In 1 second's time, the creature fell to the ground, asleep. While it was asleep, Turgle took the newfound advantage to bind it, using 2 out of several sets of manacles he has on his person. I was not familiar with that part of the story. They spent the night sleeping next to the beast, and as they woke in the morning, they decided to try and gain its favor, first with some plants, a plantain of sorts, which this carnivorous beast had no interest in. Then, Otto decides to drag one of the goblins that had attacked them, the one that Turgle had knocked unconscious, and threw it into the beast's maw. It devoured this poor creature who was sleeping and attempting to recover its grievous wounds that it will never recover from, as it has been torn asunder by the maw of this four-armed gorilla. Turgle lets out pained screams and cries, seeing that death was not necessary for them to have survived that encounter. As Otto and Gildry set off to follow that goblin that had escaped them, Turgle stayed behind and was in a state of mourning. Before long, they seemed to follow that goblin attacker home, as they found this strange bronze door covered in various coppery mosses and such that were creating a very strange pattern on the door. Otto was hit with a strike of inspiration as he donned the orb that Blackjack had given him earlier in the day, and he put it into a strange hole that was found in the door, almost as if there was an absence of a doorknob. After a few seconds, the door exploded, and it seemed to open and then close and then do a strange manner of things. There was a spiral staircase through a small hallway past the door. They headed down, but then as they heard footsteps from beneath, immediately ran to the top of the staircase and hid themselves in the surrounding area. 2 angry bugbears came up, both pikes in hand, ready to deal with this strange sound, but they were not ready for what happened, as they were absolutely destroyed by our heroes. One of them was even pushed down the stairs. He was tripped by Gildry's axe, slipped on an icy patch, and tumbled down the stairs. He was dead very shortly after his fall. They pressed on into this strange cavern built into this cave. It looked very created, as it was just beaten into the rock to make these stairs as they went down, and as they arrived at the bottom, there was a hallway which split into a Y junction, and there was a door on the right and left. Investigation of the left found it to be some sort of barracks with some cots and some sleeping hobgoblins laying around. And on the right, it was a latrine. They proceeded down the hallway and took the branch to the right of the Y junction, followed it down until they came to a guarded door. This door was guarded by 2 large bugbears, one sickly and wearing a robe which did not fit him in the slightest, and the other one was basically barren with a strange club covered in dwarven runes. Using a small pebble Odo had in his belongings, they managed to deceive the less clothing more barbaric bugbear to their location. But as they entered the wide junction into the hallway, there was another goblin that came out of the latrine. As it spotted them, it was conked on the back of the head by Turtle, there to save them and aid them in combat once more. They quickly hid in the latrine, and eventually the bugbear discovered them, but they managed to jump and absolutely destroy it before it even had a chance to make a noise. It fell backwards and almost into the door across the way from the latrine, but was caught by Gildry. His club, however, was not. It fell to the ground and rattled with the strange energy that had happened before. The group had seen it in the previous battle with the goblins. Not the one at the top of the staircase, but the one in the clearing, where one of them dropped a strange cylinder with similar runes that exploded into a burst of fire. Turtle, imbued with heroic intent, jumps onto this club. This club was not like the grenade from before, as it was filled with kinetic energy, not so much incendiary, and it propelled Turgle, who was clutching the club, down and into the other passageway of the wide junction. He ricocheted, going down through the corridors, just bouncing off walls, and eventually he shot through a door that was alongside the passage's left wall, shooting through the door, taking full brunt of the door as it splintered into him. He arrived in a strange cafeteria of sorts, with several goblins eating bowls of what they could call soup, but I am going to call disgusting. The chef at the end of the room offered him some of his creation, and he obliged and took it. It was disgusting, but he managed to keep it down. Suddenly the rest of the group arrived at the doorway and offered aid, but Turgle quickly solved the whole scenario by declaring that they were the band, and then they did this strange performance, very much carried by Turgle. It was okay, but I really hope I never need to hear Otto sing again. After the first song, Turtle saying something about the fact that they cannot perform any longer, and then he headed away quickly, and they headed further down into the unexplored areas of the cavern. Eventually they came at a point where the two paths that separated before conjoined, saw the remaining bugbear at the door, and just managed to slip by him undetected. They walked past and arrived at the stairs to this large cavernous room. In this room, across the way, sat the largest bugbear they'd seen that day, who sat tall on a throne made of skulls and gold and various precious metals, with a variety of fluffy cushions for his royal ass. Standing next to him and speaking to him was a hobgoblin wearing more leatherish garb, strange purple tinged, and sat at the bottom of the stairs that led to the throne were about approximately 5 goblins who were in a worshipping position. After a minor discussion amongst the adventurers, Turgle stepped forth and began this wonderful speech with the king. The speech went fairly well on both the speakers' parts, but what was not expected was the hobgoblin speaking to the king made an assassination attempt with a strange cylindrical dagger. Turgle, once again demonstrating that glorious hero within, dove forward and created a proxy to take the attack and deliver it unto himself instead of the king. This sparked conflict. In the room, this hobgoblin betrayer began to cast a torrent of water on the ground as it swirled around and ate several of the goblins within, smashing them against each other. Turtle cast several defensive spells onto the assassination target, and Otto fired several blasts. Meanwhile, Gildery closed the distance and began releasing a whirlwind of axing blows. Meanwhile, the king stood maintaining a defensive position, while Turgle took another grievous attack directly at the king's mind, which dealt a tremendous amount of pain. Eventually, another glorious whirlwind of blows coming from Gilderoy, Turgle walked over and dealt a concussive blow with the back of his sword onto the skull of the traitor. Then he applied another set of his manacles, offered him up to the king as a gift of loyalty. The king immediately stabbed him in the throat with a pike for betrayal. And then they had a discussion about what was to be done about their attacks on innocent travelers. During their discussion about the cease of the attacks on the travelers, the king mentioned a supplier of sorts, one that was giving them these strange artifacts. He had never met the man, but they had found his symbol, a fancy version of the dwarven runes for the letters E, B. The king eventually agreed to let off the attacks on the travelers, and our heroes 3 left the cavern.